Trump has come back from his fears of Europe, there's been a talk about a transatlantic divorce. In other words, European Union breaking off from America. But what's so funny about this, a lot of people don't realize a lot of this stuff that we're talking about today, fulfilling prophecy, what would become of America as well as this world in our time. And I have a small clip from, and Crosstalk is just looking at some of the talking points of what is going on today with NATO as well as America. You know, whether Angela Merkel would become the lead of the European Union, and you know whether they're going to build a rapid response fighting force over there. And take a look at
Germany is the most important country in Europe, and just because of its sheer economic size here. I mean, but because of the politics of austerity in the EU, how do the leaders of the EU go in to talk to voters and say, we need to spend more money on defense?
All the leaders have to reassemble again and regroup and to say what they want. And I find it quite refreshing that Mr. Trump is so honest in this. I disagree with many things he says, and I don't like him. I'm a more left-leaning politician or writer, author, whatever you call me. But I disagree with many of his policies, but I do agree that we have to upset the apple cart a bit in order to reshift things.
Okay, Mark, it's really interesting is that when Merkel used the pronoun we, she meant we Europeans. One of the interesting things that the Western media doesn't really talk about very much, that is, you know, if you can continue to try to keep the Russians at bay, you know, keep the Russians out, okay, keep the Americans in and keep the Germans down, this is kind of a defining moment, because is this what Angela Merkel is talking about? Because, you know, if you look at the situation with Russia and Mr. Trump may be signaling that he's lost interest, then you have a German-centric Germany. Is that something NATO allies have actually thought about? Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think that's always been a problem. Yes, that whether we talk about NATO or we talk about the EU, one of the reasons why other countries like the Dutch or the Danes or whoever wanted the British in was in order to balance any preponderance of German power, and it's very difficult to imagine. And this is why NATO is, in a sense, an organisation that has enormous power and influence, but is not really known to many people, particularly as we no longer have military conscription. Fewer and fewer ordinary people have been involved in the military. But that also has the downside that we can have NATO policies of intervening in Libya, in Syria, and around the world, even now building a kind of NATO-Arab alliance, because you have a professional mercenary military rather than a citizen military. And this means that you can carry through policies that don't really affect the bulk of the population, in the sense that the body bags are seen to be professionals, they've taken the chance, that's their chance. Of course, it can then have huge blowback, as we've seen from Libya. But I think this is the big danger, that military policy and democracy are being separated.
Yeah, no. A very good point. Go ahead, jump in. Go ahead.
Peter, on the question,
go ahead.
On the question of NATO, I'm not a fan of NATO. Any of my readers or followers would know that quite well. At the same time, I think it has to be frankly admitted that if we take NATO out of the equation today, Europe is defenseless. The component that would be taken out at once is Britain. Britain is leaving the EU. Britain was never a subscriber to the notion of a European army. This was always held, that is, David Cameron's feet were always held to the fire on that very issue, but Britain in no way would subscribe to a European.
Does the European Union have? What enemy do NATO members have, other than terrorism, from what I can see? What other enemy do they have?
No, this was the very issue that was brought out about a little over a year ago in a Center for European Policy Studies a brochure on the creation of a European army, which followed closely upon exactly Angela Merkel's statement then in favor of such an army. The fact that she has come out over this weekend talking about Europe looking to its own, that is a continuation and perhaps a more precise explanation of what she had said more cryptically before in favor of a European army. But a European army will reflect the very differing conceptions of threats to Europe, depending on where you are geographically. Southern Europe, France and Italy and Spain, they look to North Africa as the greatest threat to their well-being and their safety, whereas Central Europe and Eastern Europe look to Russia. Now, the issue is not how justified these views are, but you have to acknowledge these are the issues. They also mean that the various European states, which have very large budgets and which together several times exceed Russia, are not equipped at present to act in a unified way against either one of those threats from the south or from the east. And so we take an enormous effort now to constitute a European army.
On that note, gentlemen, we've run out of time. Fascinating discussion. Again, we don't know.
They're talking about a divorce of America. In other words, NATO breaking off altogether from the United States. And that's going to happen. It's not a question of if it is, it's going to happen. And so he's talking about this rapid response fighting force. A lot of people don't know. Sometimes they're telling us stuff, but some of this stuff has been talked about previous to this time, you know, way years out before this time. I wrote a book called The Revival of the Roman Empire. And in the book of The Revival of the Roman Empire, I'm discussing this, and this book is written, come out in 2010 from Wikipedia, the Free Encyclopedia. And I have this insert in my book. It said, originally under the Amsterdam Treaty, the WEU, which is the Western EU, will give an integral role in giving the EU an independent defense capability, playing a major role in the Peterburg's task. However, the situation is challenging. On 13th of November 2000, WEU minister met in Montreal and agreed to begin transferring the organization capability and functions to the European Union under its Development Common Foreign Security Policy, CFSP. The European Security Force and Defense Policy, ESDP 3. For example, on January 2002, the EU Security Studies Institute and Satellite Center was transferred to the EU and became the EU Union Institution for Security Studies and the European Union Satellite Central. Notable, the role given to the WEU in Amsterdam Treaty was removed by the Nice Treaty. The European Constitution was given the role of collective defense to NATO. The Treaty of Lisbon has provisions for cooperation between the EU and both NATO, including the Berlin Plus Agreement and the WEU 4 and 5. However, the Defense Committee, Article 42.7 of the Treaty of Europe Union Amendment of the Treaty of Lisbon could be viewed as incorporating the defense commitment to the EU framework. As a summary of some of the moves toward merging the WEU into the EU. In other words, what they're talking about is they've been talking about building a defensive force besides NATO, and it's already in their constitution. In other words, it's already in their planning. So with Trump moved, when he made his move, he just made it where it became concrete. That's what we're going to do. We do not need. That's what Angela Merkel was talking about. We do not need America. Okay, that's exactly what she's letting it be known. But there's already been a plan to automatically remove them from their defense force, and that's something that is written in my book. And I talk about how eventually that America will no longer be part of NATO, and NATO will withdraw itself from America. And that's in this book called The Revival of the Roman Empire. And I'm not going to bore you by going through this book, but I suggest you as a book. I changed the cover. I put the European Union headquarters on there, and I suggest you go out and get that book. That's a good book, and it really talks about what is going on right now that we're seeing, because this is prophetic in nature. There's no way on earth that I could have known of this without there being God involved, and it's scriptural. So what it is a warning to the world. The world is not listening. The world is in a sleeping state. Nobody's really paying attention. Everybody's having pleasure in America. Everybody's just having a good time the best they can, and the world has spun out of control here. Okay, and the Bible tells us there was a time coming, and like I said, my reality news is dealing with prophecy. You know, with up-to-date prophecy. And what we're seeing today, as you've seen just a minute ago on Crosstalk, is all this planning. But though what they're thinking they're thinking that this could possibly happen, is going to happen. This is not something that is impossible. This is going to happen because America, like any other empire, American time has come and gone. Donald Trump is the ending of America. It's not going to keep going on. We're going to be this superpower. It's going to make America great again, which is a joke in itself. You know, a nation is built off of genocide. You know, they killed indigenous people, and then they enslaved another nation, which is the nation of Israel here, us. And that's one of the greatest told lies, where they have Europeans living in Israel, and they're not actual Jews or the actual children of Israel. You know, they have no lineage in that. But I'm not trying to take us off on that, but this is a warning from God. He's telling us, get ready, because his son, he's about to send his son again. And we're seeing that because that's prophetic in nature. That deals with chapter 17 of Revelation, when he talks about the 10 horns and the beasts. The 7 is part of 8. That is the NATO alliance, or not the NATO alliance, but the European Union alliance. We said the 7th is part of 8 with the Arab nations. And they touched on that also. You see in those videos talking about an Arab and NATO alliance. No, it's going to be a European and Arab alliance. Okay, let's look at the scriptures. Okay, it says, because what we're dealing with is a coming kingdom. That's what everybody understands. These kingdoms are rising and falling. And Daniel, when he had a vision, he had a head of gold. You know, that was something that's where the rival of the Roman Empire comes from, because I was looking at Daniel vision and I understood it. Daniel is talking about, people like to dismiss the Bible, but Daniel was talking about this coming world. The Bible is a book of nations, really. It tells you about the rise and fall of nations, how Israel has been doing with God. You know, what's been happening and how we've handled all the nations we've been fighting. So it's really a kingdom book. And it's talking about, it tells us how to have a relationship with God. But in the kingdom book, it tells us about the rise and fall of world government, which Daniel